Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Matcha and Murder. If you're new here, hi, my name is Shay, and I'm your host. This podcast is still growing, and I'm definitely still finding my rhythm with it. I talk about true crime cases, and we discuss all the details together. So whether you're binging from episode 1 or you just stumbled across this one today, thank you for being here. Before we get into today's episode, I do want to give a quick disclaimer. This podcast discusses real crimes involving real people, and today's episode we will be talking about sensitive topics, including self-harm and mental health struggles that can be difficult for some listeners. So if any of these topics are triggering for you, please feel free to skip this episode and I will see you in the next one. Everything shared in this episode is based on publicly available information, research, and sources available at the time of recording. With that being said, you guys, go ahead and grab your matcha because today we are taking a deeper look at the disappearance of Christopher Kerze. Christopher Matthew Kerze was born to Jim and Lonnie Kerze on February 19th, 1973 in Eagan, Minnesota. Together, they had 3 sons. Christopher was the eldest, followed by brothers Tim and Patrick. Christopher grew up in what many would describe as a stable, middle-class household. From a young age, Christopher was described as intelligent and thoughtful. He loved skiing and the outdoors, taking frequent camping trips with his family. He did well academically and had a strong interest in reading and writing. He had attended Henry Sibley High School, which is now called Two Rivers High School, where he was on the school's swim team and played clarinet in the school band. Christopher was very smart. He was a National Scholar semifinalist, and he was invited to join the National Honor Society. Friends and classmates often described him as intelligent, responsible, kind, and somewhat reserved. He wasn't the loudest person in the room, but he did have a small, close group of friends. And that's the part that makes this case so unsettling. There was no dramatic fallout, no major event. He just simply vanished. And that's what brings us to April 20th, 1990. The morning of Friday, April 20th, 1990, Christopher's father was away on a business trip, and it was just 17-year-old Christopher, his mom, and 2 younger brothers in the house that morning. Christopher woke up around his normal time, but this particular morning he told his mother he had a headache and didn't feel well. He told her he wanted to stay home from school, and Christopher, being very serious about his education and hardly ever missing school, his mother believed that he really wasn't feeling well and agreed to let him stay home. So Lonnie gave him some medicine for his headache, and then she left for work. That alone wasn't unusual, but what happened next was. When Lonnie arrived home later that day, she immediately knew something wasn't right, as she noticed the driveway was empty. The family van, a blue 1988 Dodge Caravan, was gone. She also noticed that the family dog was running around loose in the front yard, which was odd because the dog was never allowed to be out alone. Lonnie got the dog inside and then took a look around the house searching for Christopher. That's when she noticed that he wasn't there. She found a note on the kitchen counter Christopher had left that read, "Mom, something came up, plus feeling somewhat better. Back by 6, unless I get lost. Love, Chris." The word lost was underlined twice in this note. Now, you might think that that's strange for him to underline the word lost twice, but Lonnie actually said she believed it was a reference to a running family joke. Christopher hadn't been driving long and was bad with directions, so he often got lost. And you have to remember that this was in 1990, long before GPS. Lonnie wasn't immediately concerned, but the note was very vague. Christopher didn't say specifically where he was going or what exactly came up. She thought it had to have been something extremely important because Christopher wasn't the type to leave his loved ones worrying about him. And later that evening, when Christopher hadn't returned home, Lonnie called her husband Jim to let him know about the situation, and he immediately returned home from his business trip. They tried to report Christopher missing around midnight that night, but the police told them that they had to wait 24 hours before filing an official report. Unfortunately, that waiting period is a common practice since many missing individuals do resurface within the first day. Still, it can be incredibly frustrating for families, especially because those first 24 hours are often the most critical when it comes to locating missing persons. So Lonnie and Jim reluctantly waited the 24 hours and then they reported Christopher missing. A few important things to note about this is that the family later discovered Christopher withdrew $200 from his savings account the day he disappeared. They also noticed that Jim's 20-gauge shotgun was missing from the home, but no ammunition was taken. And on the following day, on April 21st, Lonnie and Jim received a letter in the mail postmarked from Duluth, Minnesota, roughly 2 hours northeast of Eagan. In the letter, it stated that he faked being sick so that he could stay home from school to gain access to the family vehicle. The letter then grew darker as it expressed his intention to end his life, and he apologized for hurting his loved ones. He also wrote in the letter, "Take heart, because if just one person is better off for having known me, my life will not have been wasted." And this was absolutely devastating for his parents and two brothers. They had no idea what could have pushed Christopher to this point. Everything he did was completely out of character. Skipping school, leaving without telling anyone where he was going, taking the family car, and now the idea of him ending his life. And when they received this letter, they had absolutely no idea if Christopher had already taken his life or not. His family was left completely in the dark with so many unanswered questions. But receiving the letter did give them a small clue. That is, if this letter was from Christopher, he had been in Duluth. Regarding his mental state, Christopher had been navigating the typical pressures of adolescence: school expectations, his identity, the future, all of the things that can feel very overwhelming at 16 or 17. Authorities had looked into whether Christopher could have been suffering from depression, but family and friends reported no obvious red flags. However, and this is important, many teens that struggle internally don't openly display it. And in 1990, mental health discussions were far less common than they are today. And it is possible that he could have been silently battling something. But investigators reportedly found no diary entries, no school counselor reports, and no documented crisis. His father, Jim, later stated, "I tell you, when people talk about their hearts sinking, I used to think that was some metaphor. It is not. You can be so torn up that your heart actually feels like it's dropping. It weighs a lot. It's a moment that I hope I never have to live through again." And that is just so incredibly heartbreaking to read. I really feel for him and his family. The next day, on Sunday, April 22nd, the family's 1988 Dodge Caravan was discovered by authorities abandoned on the roadside near the Continental Divide of Highway 38, near the wooded area of George Washington State Forest, south of Grand Rapids. The keys were left inside and there was no sign of damage, but there was a note found inside, written by Christopher, simply stating who the vehicle belonged to. And coincidentally, Christopher's grandparents lived in Grand Rapids, and they had been asked if they had seen or heard from him, but they said they hadn't. Search teams combed the area extensively, and police dogs were brought in to aid in the nearby wooded areas. And one police officer did state that the dogs did pick up Christopher's scent from the van and followed it for approximately 1 mile from Highway 38. However, that scent ended abruptly and nothing was found. So here's what we know. We know that the letter was sent from Duluth and the van was found in Grand Rapids. But did he send the letter first and then ditch the car, or the other way around? Well, the police actually spoke to a witness who stated that they had given a ride to a hitchhiker who fit Christopher's description, and they claimed that they gave him a ride to Duluth. If the hitchhiker was Christopher, it would make sense that he drove to Grand Rapids and abandoned the van before ultimately hitchhiking a ride to Duluth, where he sent the letter. Lonnie and Jim began receiving phone calls from an anonymous caller. The person on the other end was quiet and wouldn't say a word, but the background was loud, almost as if they were at a party. And soon after this, Christopher's best friend also started receiving the same phone calls. But anytime they would try to speak, The anonymous caller on the other end would immediately disconnect the call. These calls, unfortunately, were not able to be traced and were never confirmed to have been Christopher, but his parents believe without a doubt that this was their son making these phone calls. And these calls went on for 6 months before they suddenly stopped. And if it was Christopher, why would he have done this? Did he simply miss his loved ones and want to hear their voices? And if so, why did the calls stop so suddenly? And in 2004, 14 years after Christopher disappeared, the Eagan Police Department received an anonymous letter postmarked from Seattle, Washington. This letter claimed Christopher was a guardian angel, and whoever wrote it urged the police and everyone to stop searching for him, claiming that he was alive and would return home when he was ready. Investigators were unable to authenticate this letter and ultimately conclude it was a hoax, but it was another example that would give Lonnie and Jim hope that their son was still out there. The authorities believe that Christopher took his life shortly after leaving his home on April 20th, 1990, but his family has never doubted his being alive. Jim and Lonnie did end up moving from their family home in Eagan, but they have kept the same phone number for all these years in case Christopher would reach out to them again one day. They are still active in searching for their son, and in 2016, they did an interview pleading for their son to come home, with Jim saying, "Resolution is a funny thing. We aren't going to know anything about what happened to Christopher until one day we'll know everything that happened to Christopher." So the idea here is to generate enough noise so that we can begin to find resolution. When investigators look at a case like Christopher Kerze, they often bring in behavioral analysis to evaluate patterns. From a profiling standpoint, there are a few elements that stand out. First, preparation. Christopher didn't just impulsively walk out. He withdrew nearly all of his savings, and he left letters. That suggests planning. Second, the tone of the letters. While the full context of the letters haven't been released, reports describe them as apologetic and reflective, not angry, not blaming, and not chaotic. And that can align with someone experiencing internalized distress rather than external conflict. Profilers often note that adolescents under high achievement pressure may internalize failure or perceived inadequacy intensely, even if no one around them sees it. An honor student with a job can still feel overwhelmed in ways that never surface outwardly. But here's the complicating factor. In cases of planned suicide, individuals don't often withdraw most of their savings. That typically is associated with starting over, not ending things. And in voluntary disappearance cases, there's usually some eventual financial or identity trace. But Christopher's complete absence for decades doesn't neatly fit either profile, which leaves investigators with what they sometimes call a behavioral gray zone, a situation where the actions suggest intention, but the outcome suggests interpretation. Did he intend to leave and encounter foul play? Did he intend suicide but prepare in a way that mimicked starting over? Or was he carefully planning a new identity and succeeded? And 3 decades later, there are still no definitive answers. And cases like this challenge investigators because there is no crime scene. His family has lived in limbo since 1990, not knowing whether to grieve or to hope. And that might be the cruelest part of it all. There are no definitive answers. Just silence. An interesting side note that I thought I would mention, in 1993, the band Asylum released a music video for their song Runaway Train, which originally featured photos of 36 missing persons at the time. Photo of Christopher Kerze is featured at the timestamp of 3/26. While 21 people who were featured in the video were eventually recovered, which is great, sadly 11 featured in the video still remain missing, including Christopher. And I will include a link in the description to the music video if you have not seen it yet. I highly suggest watching it. Christopher is still considered missing and his case remains open. If Christopher Kerze is alive today, he would be 53 years old, last seen on April 20th, 1990, when Christopher was 17 years old at the time of his disappearance. And if you have any information regarding Christopher's disappearance, you can contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-843-5678 or the Eagan Police Department at 1-651-675-5700. I will also leave the contact details in the description below as well. And one other video I did want to mention that I came across while researching is one from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It's of his mother, Loney, reminiscing about fun memories of him and includes a bunch of photographs of Christopher. And watching it definitely made me tear up a bit, so I will leave that in the description for you all to watch as well. As always, with any case, please approach it with compassion. Real people are still affected. Thank you guys so much for joining me on today's case. New episodes go up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, with the video version going live on YouTube as well. If you guys have any case suggestions that you'd like to see me dive into, go ahead and leave those in the comments below. And make sure you subscribe so that you never miss another episode. Until next time, take care of yourself, and I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.